Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Tory. I like the laughter in the room this morning. How are we feeling? It's going to be a good morning. We have a great panel for you. And I did not lose my notes in the computer, but I did leave my glasses on the chair, so I'm going to go get them. Thank you very much, sir. All right. The theme of today's panel discussion is leading through complexity, collaboration in our growing city region. In the next 10 years, we can expect more growth and change in the Greater Toronto Area. We need only to look out at our ever-changing skyline to see that, both downtown and in the surrounding regions. Walk our streets, you'll see the changing demographic and the strategic advantage of living in a region where residents collectively speak over 100 languages. And as we look back at our shared accomplishments in the GTR, we've weathered the economic crisis, fingers crossed that continues. We are breathing cleaner air, we're diverting more waste, and we have thousands of arts and culture organizations that generate about $9 billion for our GDP. Now that's some of the good news, which I'm happy to give you for a change instead of all the bad news I give you on TV every night. But what are the challenges and opportunities ahead that we need to prepare ourselves for? And we have gathered here an esteemed panel to give you the bad news. Where are they? I'm going to ask you to take your seats. If I could, Mike Pedersen, Gabrielle Scrimshaw, and Cameron Bailey. We're going to get them to introduce themselves a little later, but I do want them to get ready. In the next 10 years, we have more complex challenges to address and even greater aspirations for the kind of thriving region we hope to be. The only way we can get there is by having all of our region's leaders and individuals with potential work together with government to keep building a region and finding solutions. That's where an organization like CivicAction comes in. In the past 10 years, as we've heard from Mr. Tory, it has looked at questions of environment, diversity, income security, promoting research clusters, etc. And now we are focusing on transportation. And right now, CivicAction has identified regional transportation as its top priority, along with regional economic performance, inclusion, and resilience. And looking forward, we want to know what we as leaders in the room need to do to continue to drive the Greater Toronto region forward. We have three individuals who are city builders and have been involved with CivicAction in different ways. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us how they've been connected to CivicAction and answer our first question. And ladies first, Gabrielle. We're going to ask you, what do you think is the greatest challenge/opportunity for the GTA for the next 10 years?
That's an easy one to answer. So I'll quickly introduce myself.
Introduce yourself and tell us about your connection to CivicAction.
Yeah, a great connection. So I'm actually somebody who's somewhat new to this city. I came to Toronto just 2 years ago in the fall of 2010 to pursue an employment opportunity with the Royal Bank of Canada. I'm in a rotational leadership program there. Outside of my work sphere, and I think a lot of us do a lot of our city building activities sort of, and from a volunteer capacity, I was involved as a DiverseCity fellow. That was my first connection to CivicAction back in 2011. And through that program, started up a project called the Aboriginal Professional Association of Canada, which has since grown into a full-blown not-for-profit servicing over 200 Aboriginal professionals across Canada, but primarily here in the GTA. So that's something that we're pretty excited about. I know. Oh, thank you. And I guess now to move on to the question of the challenges or opportunities facing us in the next 10 years. I will start by saying that I already mentioned that I am somewhat of a newcomer to Toronto. Of the 10 years that CivicAction has been operating in the city, I've only been here for 20% of that time. But it's been a very exciting time that I've been able to be here. And when I think about Toronto, so thinking about the time when I moved to Toronto, two things surprised me about this city. Number one, and it sounds maybe terrible to say, but people were a lot more friendly than I thought they would be. and now that I'm here, I'm like, well, yeah, it's Toronto, but we hear about all the statistics of Toronto being sort of one of the most hated cities outside of Toronto, which is sad because it's such a great city. And I thought that, I didn't know what I thought, but people were a lot more friendly. So that's one. And then the other one was, you know, we talk about this cultural richness in Canada and in Ontario and in Toronto, and I'd never really felt it or had it resonate as strongly as when I would walk down the street to work and I hear 5 different languages every day, and I don't even look twice. I don't even think twice about it, and that's something that I think is really special about Toronto from an opportunity perspective. Human capital is continually pointed as you know, a strategic or a competitive advantage for Ontario and for Toronto, the Toronto region. I think that's true. I think we need to keep on working to make it a more, you know, as John was saying, a more fair and inclusive place. I think we still have a lot of work to do from that capacity, and I'm really, really passionate about that space. And then the other two, and I'll leave you with this, is from an emerging leader perspective. We have the Emerging Leaders Network, we have these DiverseCity Fellows, 2 really, really great networks. And I think that it's a really exciting time, I would not even say just in Toronto, but actually around the world, to be sort of in this emerging leaders generation. And I say that because you know, 20 or 30, the world's changed a lot in the last 20 or 30 years. We're increasingly more integrated from a global economic perspective. But technology and things are changing so much that, you know, for some of the people, like if my father went to university, which he didn't, but if he did, the classes that when I went to university didn't even exist or were not even conceptualized when he would have went to university. So the world's changing at a really fast pace, and the emerging leaders bring a different, I think, perspective to the table, and that's one that's really exciting. I'll be talking about today. And then I'll leave you with the last point of digital and social media, something that I think is, we haven't really even hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of how well we can use it from an opportunity perspective. We no longer need permission to start a movement, and certainly we've seen that around the world, and the use of digital and social media with that. So those are some of the opportunities that I see for us moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we take your point. You do have to know us to love us here in Toronto. Our host, Mike Pedersen.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure why I'm up here. I'm neither very diverse or particularly emerging. I still have hope that I'll emerge as a leader, but the hour is getting late. I have been involved in civic action since David Pico nearly broke my arm, convincing me to do so. It's something I've never regretted, because this is an organization that actually has had tremendous impact, and I believe it can have even more impact going forward. I agree with everything John Tory said a few minutes ago. In answer to the question, what are the biggest challenges or opportunities for Toronto, I'll share 2. And I'll just begin with echoing what John said, that this is a great city. It's a world-class city. I've lived 2 decades of my life in Europe. I've lived in other world-class cities. This has the potential to be the best. People want to live here. They like living here. They want to visit here. But as John said, unless we address issues, I do think that status is at risk going forward. So the 2 I'll choose to speak of, one is a very specific one. The other is more general. The first is transportation, and I'm obviously giving a little plug for this civic action priority right now. What we have does not work now, and it will get worse if we don't invest in it significantly. Transportation is something that is the glue of a society, of a city region, of a city. It can unleash and liberate all parts of the Greater Toronto region, whether that's business, as in my case, or whether it's newcomers to Canada, or the poor, or students, or seniors. And in all of those respects, the transportation system that Toronto has right now is not working, and it will get much worse if we don't address it. We'll have more congestion, more pollution, higher economic damage, and more social issues as a result of not having a great transportation system. This issue has been around for over 2 decades. It has fallen victim to political wrangling, to bureaucracy, to self-interested views, and it's just got to stop. We need to somehow come together and solve this problem so that this city can be everything it has the potential to be, and not just rest on its laurels. The second challenge I'll share is related, and that is how we figure out a way to govern this city region. We have 29 municipalities, each with their own mayor or chair, and they do not work. well enough together to solve the region's problems. A lot of the most important things that face this city region are regional in nature. Immigration is, helping newcomers to Canada is, transportation is, the environment is, economic development is. These are all issues that CivicAction is working on. So in the last little while, we've achieved a great success, which is to have the chairs and mayors of those 29 municipal governments come together twice a year. The question is, why did it take John Tory and CivicAction to make that happen? And why has it taken so long? If you step back and think about it, it's a no-brainer that our leaders in the municipalities need to collaborate more than they have, need to work together, and need to get outside their parochial interests. So I have high hope that we can make progress on this, but there's a long way to go. Again, what we've had is not going to get us to where we need to go. I'll stop there.
All right. Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director, Toronto International Film Festival.
Thank you, Dwight. I will echo what I think has been said by Mike and Gabrielle so far. I think some of the challenges that I see are similar. I would say transportation being number one, integration being another one, and I guess the other one that you could maybe connect to that is just a sense of mobility. I think there's a for me, transportation is an issue that is not about simply getting people from home to work and back again. It's about what access they have to different parts of the city. It's about the kind of public transit deserts in a way that we have in certain parts of the city where buses, the routes end at certain times of night. People can't get home or to where they want to go in easy ways. And I feel like we don't all have access to the same kind of transportation if we're dependent on public transit, certainly. So that's one thing. And integration, I think, is connected because the sense that I always get in this city is that although there is this incredible rich diversity, and CivicAction has been key and I think in articulating the value of that, it's not equally distributed, and people don't have equal access to all of the riches that this city has, and that is really one of the key problems for me. So you know, I work for one of the largest cultural events in the city, the Toronto International Film Festival, and TIFF has a large presence, and we mobilize lots of people. But I've seen in the 5 years that I've been in this role as the artistic director that not all of Toronto comes to the festival. Not all of Toronto feels like they are a part of it. Even our building, which is open year-round and has all kinds of programming from every corner of the planet, the doors themselves can be a barrier, a kind of a cultural barrier to some people who live in the city. They don't feel welcome. They don't feel like they're a part of it. And I think you can say the same of the building that we're in right now or any sort of major public institution. So the integration of all of the people who are in the city who maybe are new to the city or through different barriers, whether it's income barriers, class barriers, cultural capital, all of those things, don't feel fully a part of it. I think that is a huge challenge that we haven't fully faced. And until we're able to put, I guess, put it on the agenda, on the public agenda, something that we can talk about, and then put maybe some stronger policies in place, I don't think that we will get towards that goal. And until we do get there, I think we're going to run the risk of a decline, frankly, into the kind of a balkanized series of neighborhoods, a kind of a ghetto city that many cities south of the border have found themselves suffering from those same sorts of issues. So I would love to see that kind of integration become a little bit stronger on the public agenda.
All right, we've talked about the challenges. Are there examples, though, of some of the things that we are doing right, that are taking us in the right direction? To any of the three of you? You want to start?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there. I mean,
it wouldn't be too much of a downer this morning either, right?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you know, all things considered, this is a great city, and compared to many other places that I think many of us may visit, I think Toronto's doing a lot of things right. And I was pleased to see and hear what John had to say, because I think he articulates some of the real strengths and the positive aspects of Toronto as a city and where we can lead other cities. I look at the cultural aspect. I was recently, and I see that Seema's in the audience here, who is running the Artscape venue at the Daniel Spectrum out in Regent Park. I think what's being done out there is terrific. They've transformed a neighborhood that felt like it was a pocket of poverty and of isolation within the downtown area and opened it up simply by doing simple things like opening up the streets so that the traffic and people can flow through, bringing in culture, bringing in a mix of of incomes who can live and work and play in the area. The arts building, the Daniel Spectrum, is incredible. You know, the Black Arts, COBA Black Arts organization there, and the Regent Park Film Festival, and a real mix of cultures and people flowing through that building every day, bringing the people who live in the neighborhood, some of whom may be new to Toronto, into contact with others who are maybe more established Canadians. I think it's a terrific example for the rest of the city.
And Gabrielle, I follow you on Twitter. I see you out and about celebrating this city. There has to be some examples out there for you.
And I think that there are many. I will start by saying I think Toronto is a magical city. I've had the privilege of living, working, traveling to quite a few countries and quite a few continents, and I love the city of Toronto. In terms of some examples that work well, I kind of think Toronto, something that surprised me when I moved to Toronto, another thing that surprised me was these areas that we create around leaders. And I say that because, using DiverseCity as an example, or the Emerging Leaders Network as an example, we create the spaces for emerging talent or what have you to create the impact that they can create and they should be able to create. You know, Mars as an example, the Center for Social Innovation as an example. Those are just some quick examples that sort of come to my head in terms of what we're doing right and the kinds of spaces we need to create moving forward to you know, keep the momentum going. So.
Do you follow me on Twitter?
I don't, but I will as of this morning.
No, you won't. Facebook hates me. So you can't purport to be a world-class city or a great city without having things to celebrate. And I'm always struck when I travel around the world and speak with other, you know, people who are in great cities. They think Toronto is amazing for its diversity. I mean, on that score, this is by any measure an achievement. The fact that 49% of people in this city are visible minorities, a huge percentage are first generation. This is something that people in other great city regions around the world can't actually understand how we have accomplished. And I think that's a tremendous success. There are many other successes, whether it's the ones that my fellow panelists mentioned or things like Evergreen, which I think is a wonderful symbol of growth within the city. And we can't forget that, you know, we're starting from a very, very favorable place. I think the great thing about us is that even though we already are a world-class city, that we're not satisfied with that. And we're asking the tough questions in terms of how can we get even better and sustain that place in the world.
Okay. And there's an interesting leadership issue going on in our city right now. And I'm hoping, that's the best way I could put it. I'm trying to stay neutral here. I'm hoping that when we get to the question and answer period, that will come up. But it leads to this next question. What abilities do our region's leaders need, whatever sector they're in, political, business, what kind of abilities do they need to have to take us in the right direction? Without mentioning City Hall.
It seems like I'm going first. So I've already mentioned some of these things. I guess I start by saying we need a change. I, like John, believe that politicians are elected with the best of intentions. I know many of them at all levels. They are committed, hard-working, well-meaning individuals. But nevertheless, you talk to people and you more and more hear that they're fed up with the parochialism and the self-interests and not collaborating and adhering to political talking points, and that we want the problem solved. So I think that's the change we need. And in the GTA region, what we need is more collaboration and working on these regional issues as a region. The older I get, and I'm getting there, the more I believe that the single biggest important leadership attribute one can have is empathy, the ability to put oneself in other people's shoes. Because yes, you need courage and vision and communication skills and an achievement orientation, but if you can't actually think about what it is that others are solving for, what they want, what they need, and if you don't force yourself to do that, all those other things don't work because you don't have the right end that you're trying to achieve. And I think this is probably the emotion that I would wish that our municipal leaders could adopt, and then thinking from the perspective of citizens who live in the region, not necessarily in the city, and working together to achieve goals that are regional. There are 9 bankers here who just clapped, but they should clap for you too. She's a banker, believe it or not. Huh?
So I'll actually just start by echoing a lot of the sentiment of what Mike just said. We talk about it a lot in the city region in terms of collaboration, and I think that that is really important. The fact that it took CivicAction to bring, the municipal leaders around a table and discuss, collaboration in our city is just, actually, that's really surprising to me. And I think that we need to do a lot more of that in a lot of different spaces as well. And taking collaboration, I think, one step further, it's not only important to get the unusual suspects around the table, but start talking about engagement as well, so making sure that they bring their entire selves and their whole selves to the table, and that we're creating a safe, I'm all about safe spaces, so creating a safe space for them to be able to voice their really valuable opinions, because sometimes people don't always think that what they have to say is a valuable perspective, and I think that's a loss for all of us in the end. So creating those safe spaces for collaboration, but also making sure that people feel safe enough to bring their whole selves to the table, I think is really important in terms of the leadership we need moving forward.
And Cameron, we hear some of our leaders say that we shouldn't be using public money for some of our arts institutions, but those are some of the most successful partnerships and initiatives we have. There we go.
Speaking as a representative of an institution that receives a substantial amount of public money from the City of Toronto, thank you to everyone there.
And that's some of our successes.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I believe that culture is a really good avenue, a conduit, a way to get people talking to each other, a way to get people understanding and exploring each other's cultures. We show films from 72 different countries at the festival most years, and inevitably you will be confronted by something that you don't fully understand when you're in the face of a cultural product, whether it's a film or a play or a piece of music. And that's the wonderful thing about the city. And the barrier to entry for those things is really low. There's all kinds of free culture that happens on a daily basis in this city, and you can find yourself in the face of something that is going to teach you. And I think that's something that absolutely should be supported by the public. By the public resources that are there to do just that, to help bring us together through that.
Our region is a real magnet for immigrants to Canada. How does the deep diversity of our region affect how we lead and how we build pipelines to these leaders to activate them, to bring them in? How do we unlock that potential of those people coming to this region that speak 100 different languages?
There's one thing that I'll just jump in by saying. I think the electoral process and municipal politics still has not nearly tapped the diversity of this region in the way that it should. If you look at our city hall, if you look at the regions, they're not really representative in a full way of the communities that they represent. Not yet. Maybe that'll take a long time, but I think that we can try to find ways to just speed that process up a little bit. I think there probably are barriers to entry, and I think many of us know what they are in different ways. And there's certainly other fields. In fact, banking has been, strangely to me, one of the sectors that has been, I think, faster in integrating and bringing the diversity of the city into its rooms. And I haven't seen that in municipal politics in nearly the same way.
I mean, if banking can do it, if CivicAction can do it, by looking at this room today, why aren't we successful in other areas?
I'll take this one next. So I think a couple of things. So I come from a perspective, I moved from Saskatchewan. I moved from northern Saskatchewan. I'm a Westerner, born and raised out there.
We won't hold the Rough Riders against you.
Hey, honestly, I would, every time I saw a green jersey this weekend, I would go nuts. So, it was pretty exciting, although we didn't make it. So, Toronto, like I said, it's a magical city, and we actually have in the Greater Toronto Area about 80% of Canada's head offices. So diversity and inclusion in our region is not only a regional issue. In my perspective, it's actually a national issue, because we live in a region where the organizations that we work with and work for, they actually make decisions that affect the rest of Canada. So when we talk about diversity as an issue and building that pipeline of leadership in these organizations, I not only think of, what does that mean for Toronto? I think of what does it mean for my family back in Saskatchewan and the decisions that we are collectively making for them. I think that as was already mentioned on the panel, banking is a really progressive place. what more needs to get done, or what sort of have I seen work well, I would say the ability for organizations to take a chance. And I say that because, by all means, I wasn't really, I think, the usual suspect, both for the leadership program I'm in at RBC, and in some ways also for the Diversity Fellowship. When I came here, I applied for the fellowship, and I'd only been in Toronto for 2 months, so I hadn't really known the city that well. But they took a chance on somebody who they thought could create some sort of impact, or maybe had that potential. And I think if we want to continue to progress, at least in the right way and at a good pace, that we need to collectively, in the organizations that we work with and the organizations that we work for, really embrace that culture of smart risk-taking and invest in these people who will make a difference and who will make our city, region, and Canada better. Thanks.
And Mike, your industry has been paid a compliment. You might as well accept it. What are you doing to achieve this?
I will answer that, but let me just first of all say that you know, the reason this issue is so huge in Toronto is very simple, and that is that for the last decade, between 100,000 and 150,000 immigrants have come to Toronto each year. You just think about it, those are enormous numbers and obviously represent huge integration challenges. I have to say that in some respects, I applaud what the federal government is doing. I sometimes criticize what they're doing, but there are things being done that I think will make things better. There are other things they're contemplating that I don't like so much, but there are some good things underway that can help things. But again, this is ultimately more a regional issue in terms of the issues that really matter. And if you think about these 100 to 150,000 immigrants coming into Toronto every year, the question is whether Canada is taking advantage of the potential that exists inside that group of people, and whether for each one of them they feel that they can achieve their potential. And on that score, I'm afraid the answer is a resounding no in both respects. And that's where the region can do more, and that's where CivicAction is trying to impact this, to try to help with the simple things like the minute that immigrants step off the plane or cross the border, you know, what do they need? What do they need to understand the transportation system and get to job interviews? Do they know how the job system works here? Do they know how the school system works? Language, you know, these simple things that are so inadequate right now. I think those are the issues we need to address, because it's just a shame that we're not realizing this enormous potential. This is the whole reason we have immigrants come to Canada in the first place, and we're just not capitalizing on it sufficiently. Oh, TD. Yeah. I thank you for the compliment. I would actually, you know, in the interest of transparency, we don't have this nailed. We have done a very good job with women, for example, and now when we survey our employees every single year, women on every single dynamic feel that they have as much potential as men do at all levels of the organization. So that's a big victory. Sad to say that's not yet the case for visible minorities, for example. We're improving, but we're not yet there. So we've got a long way to go. We may have had some successes as an industry, and RBC's had as many as we have. That hurt. But we have a long way to go. So it's part of our problem too.
I just wanted to maybe add one more thing. You know, as we talk about this, I think we have to recognize that there's only so much that policy can do, that each one of those 100-odd thousand people that come to Toronto from outside of Canada every year, they also have a lot of potential within them to make change for themselves. And I think of my own family. I came when I was 8 years old. My mother and father were immigrants. They had divorced by that time, so we were with my mom, single mother, 2 kids. She was a nurse at North York General Hospital, and living, you know, in a very difficult circumstance economically for quite a few years. But I think she saw in herself the potential to make a change. And the one thing that she had as her brass ring was she wanted to own her own home. And so step by step, from a small rental apartment where I didn't even have a bedroom, that was embarrassing after a while, to you know, a bigger apartment and a townhouse, and then finally owning her own home out in Scarborough. I mean, that was what she grabbed onto, and she made her own way. And there actually weren't any concrete policies in place to help that. And I think we have to recognize that there's going to be organic growth among these immigrants. They have their own dreams, they have their own things they want to accomplish, and we can maybe help them, but I don't think we should ever expect that we're going to be able to you know, do everything for those people. I think there's a lot that they will have to do, and they want to do themselves.
And I do feel your pain. I had to bunk with Mom for the first few years in Canada. It wasn't a good thing. Before we get to the floor and some questions, we keep hearing about transportation. It seems to be one of our biggest challenges in this region. I don't know if you ever saw on YouTube, there's actually a YouTube video of our mayor, and they've put it together maybe 100, 200 times of him just saying subway, 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 in all kind of different ways. Somebody was really clever about that. But how do we get to that? How do we get that 32 minutes back a day that it takes that we lose traveling around this region? What do we need to do? You guys have traveled the world. Where are they doing it right that we can learn from?
You know, people always say Scandinavia, and it's kind of true. And in a lot of those European cities, walking and bicycling are probably the two biggest ways that people can get around, certainly in a smaller area. Toronto's a much bigger region, obviously, so cars have to be a part of that. But I think public transit and it has got to be invested in a bigger way. And look, I know, you know, there have been many plans, many ideas put forward, but I don't know that there's been the, I'll call it, courage to actually say this is going to cost a lot of money, and it's a long-term investment over many years or even decades, but we have to do it.
There's so many brilliant points being raised. I'll again echo, I think, what Cameron said. I've had the opportunity of traveling, and when I think of great transportation, I think of places in Asia. I think of Tokyo. I think of Beijing and Guangzhou and some of these cities that have had the courage, but also just simply made it a priority from the municipal level for transportation. And I think that's something that we need to do. Yes, it will cost a lot of money. I still have a lot to learn about our transportational issues from a regional perspective, and I'll be going to the ELN studio this Saturday to contribute more on that and learn more, of course. But I think we need to make it a priority. We need to understand that our city is growing, and that in order for us to really reap the full potential, that we need to have a more integrated transportational system.
And Mike, we keep hearing about the cost, but can we afford not to fix it?
Well, that would certainly be my contention, and I've spoken to this issue already. I would just say that, we're now in a situation where we've got political uncertainty at the city level and at the provincial level, and even as we have almost election-like dynamics, you still hear many politicians say, well, I'm not sure this is the right time to address this, and they're just not ready to face what the electorate wants, and that's just got to change. So the first thing is just getting politicians onto this agenda, and that's of course what CivicAction, the Board of Trade, others are trying to do right now. The big issue is how to fund this. This is very expensive, as Cameron said. This is likely $50 billion over a couple of decades. Every single level of government is operating at a deficit and has fiscal issues. It isn't likely that we can draw on those sources. So the debate that CivicAction is trying to stoke along with the Board of Trade is what are the options for funding this? We actually don't have a view. We just have a view that if you liberate that discussion, get the dialogue to happen at kitchen tables as opposed to in political boardrooms, that you probably can come to a sensible place where people will say, yeah, much as I don't like it, we're going to have to do something here. It is going to cost money, and here's how I'd prefer that it be paid for. And there are models outside of Toronto where they've done it. Even here in Canada, in Vancouver, there's something called TransLink, where they've actually got access to 3 separate sources of funding across the region, where they've worked together to come up with a solution that works for Vancouver. In Stockholm, they've tried things. They tried a congestion charge, and then after the citizens tried it, they did a referendum so that people could make an informed choice. Los Angeles is another place where they've introduced taxes after voting on it that created a better transportation system. So there are lots of models for this. It isn't about not having any models. It's about will and political courage and collaboration. And again, that's what we've got to make happen.
Cameron. Okay, you bankers, stop it. I'm just kidding.
I just wanted to add one brief thing. Quite obviously, development is connected to transportation, and although this hasn't always been done perfectly in Toronto, I think what's happened with the condo boom in the last few years has actually had some positive outcomes, which is that people are living closer to where they work, closer to where they play, and they actually don't need their cars quite as often. And I think that has to be a part of the transportation solution as well. All
right. I'd like to take the opportunity now to open up the floor to some questions. I'm nearsighted, so I got to take this off to actually see you guys. I know that the panelists were really excited about hearing from you this morning. So we have a microphone right there, and I think a few people are putting up their hands. If we could just get the microphones to them, that would be great. Just identify yourself, sir.
My name's Tatum Wilson, and I'm a 2009 Diversity Fellow. and I work at CAMH now, actually. So, and that's sort of where my question comes from. I think on the issue of mental health and addictions, we have found a way to break down some of the partisanship that exists in both levels of government, provincial and federal, and sort of people are recognizing the need for it. And so my question is that in the context of how we work at CivicAction, which is a noble idea of nonpartisan, working together, bringing together unusual suspects and those kind of things, I just wonder how we reconcile that. And I used to work at Queen's Park, so I know that world as well. How do we reconcile that sort of lofty goal with the fact that our politics are in fact becoming more acutely partisan and sort of willing to capitalize on those sort of kind of clutch issues that they think they can gain some steam on or create a wedge on or whatever. So I just think that at some point we hit that wall where we have to find a different way, whether it's engaging citizens or engaging other types of leaders or the politicians to actually say you need to stop doing this. So I'm just curious about what your thoughts are. I know that sort of in arts and culture and in banking, I mean, there's been different ways of bringing different groups of people together, but how do we
achieve collective leadership?
Yeah, but in the context of where our politicians are actually becoming more partisan and not more collaborative.
Cameron? I'll go first.
Over to you, Mike.
I guess the way I think about it is that I refuse to concede that it's not possible to have politicians think in the interests of their constituents. And I do think that perhaps with some prodding we can get them to do that to a greater extent. I fear that it will take crises to make it happen, but my hope is that things we're doing, like the Mayors and Chairs Forum, for example, will gradually help to promote this agenda of regional collaboration. There's another great thing that John is doing, which is that we used to have, I think it was 13 different economic development agencies around Toronto. We still do. John has pulled them together and are getting them to work on how they can work together, because that's a huge, huge lever to make Toronto more successful. So, I guess what I'd say is that I still hold out hope that it can happen, but by being here, I'm mitigating the risk that it might not happen or might not happen as fast as we'd like. Because I do think that all of us can have impact, and by being here that you are having impact. And if CivicAction going forward can exercise even greater influence on every political level and really push for this notion of collaboration and regional approaches to regional issues, then we can make headway while we hope that political enlightenment will evolve.
But are we held captive by the political cycle? As soon as you get somebody on board, maybe we have an election and then we have new people in office that you may have to start from the ground level to build with again?
I think part of the problem is that politicians too often come in thinking that they do have to start from ground zero. They do have to start from scratch and reinvent everything. I see it more as a caretaking position. You're a gardener. There's a wild garden out there that's the city of Toronto, and you've got to tend it, and sometimes there are weeds that are actually useful. Do you know what I mean? And you have to figure out how to do that, but you can't just dig it all up and try to start all over again, because obviously nobody has enough time, and it's probably a bad idea anyhow, because there are certain things that are already growing there well.
I'll just add to this quickly. So when I think about politics, and I certainly don't think politicians are bad people. I think public servants are great people. It's a great profession. I think we have to take the sometimes frustrating long-term view, in that we need to, in terms of building more collaboration moving forward, start to understand what the different perspectives are around the table. Increasingly in the world, some of our most pressing issues are sort of these tri-sector issues. They're going to take people from the private, the public, and the social sectors to sit around the table. And if we can build a pipeline of leaders, I think, that understand those three perspectives, and then maybe they become a politician or a public servant, and maybe they become an executive in a bank, or maybe they become, a leader in a more of a social and arts based organization, then I think we can start to understand and really move things forward. Again, it's long term, it's frustrating, it might be slow, but I think that we need to start thinking about that from a collaboration perspective.
Is that the optimism that comes with youth?
I think so. I think so. And I will say that I think that I am a bit of an idealist, if you haven't noticed that already. And I think idealism is good. I think naive idealism is bad. So trying to match that perspective that things can get better, but we need experience and to really work at it to get there.
All right.
Hi, my name's Adriana Beemans. I'm a 2009 fellow and with Working Women Community Center. One of the things that I find very impressive about CivicAction is their ability to start working years in advance on what a key issue is going to be in the future, and that they help do the research and the data and push the issue onto the agenda, but also have the information and the research to respond when that issue finally is on the agenda. So using your fortune-telling capabilities, what do you think are some of the issues that we need to start preparing now, that we need to do research, we need to do data, we need to do collaboration, that in the Greater Toronto area is going to be a key issue in 5 or 7 years from now, because it takes that long to build the issues. And I think when we were looking at municipal agenda cuts, we saw a lot of movement happen very quickly around the libraries, where all of a sudden people came quickly to talk about what are key priorities in the municipality for them as community services. So I'm just wondering, what do you see as key issues that we need to start galvanizing ourselves around and do quantifiable, strong research to back up?
Good question.
I can take this one first, and I'm really happy that you asked this question, because it segues nicely into my professional association, the Aboriginal Professional Association. Within Toronto, between 2001 and 2006, the Aboriginal population in the city grew by 31%. In Canada, we're the fastest growing demographic in Canada. Between 1996 and 2006, our population grew by roughly 45%, so 3 times the national average. In the next 15 years, we will see 600,000 Aboriginal youth enter the workforce. So these are just really high-level statistics, but we need more. We need to better understand this marketplace, and I think it's something that affects the organizations, again, that we work for, we work with, and more. You can't manage what you don't measure, and I think we need to invest in that as a priority for not only the Toronto region, but again for Canada, because these affect people all over Canada, and it is the fastest growing demographic. I think our organization is one small piece of a larger puzzle with that, and we're aiming to do more thought leadership around this space, but we also need more of a strategic perspective and more of an enlightenment from people, be it policymakers or people and leaders and organizations, to say, listen, there's this population tsunami coming, it's going to hit the workforce, it's going to affect every single one of us. Maybe this is something that we should look at.
Go ahead.
You know, it's a very good question, and there may be much greater wisdom in this room than I can offer. But the one thing that I haven't heard much of is what is going to happen with this new condo boom, the development of the tens of thousands of units and the tens of thousands of people who are moving into new areas in quite concentrated pockets in 10, 15 years. What is that going to do to infrastructure? What is that going to do to the social environments in those areas? How are those areas going to evolve over time? Are we going to find sort of caverns of empty condos, you know, in a few years' time? And what does that mean? So neighborhoods are being drastically changed by pretty rapid development, and I don't know, I haven't seen any kind of long-term examination of what that means.
So I like the way you phrase your question, because that is actually what CivicAction tries to do: identify issues that are not being addressed sufficiently, at least, and that need to be addressed because they're important to the city's health and growth and prosperity. So a lot of the things that we're working on, whether it's the immigration issue or the environment, where we've done a lot, or transportation, are exactly those kinds of issues. In answer more specifically to your question, the one that I worry about more generally, that's not even on the radar of most people in the city, is the broader issue of infrastructure renewal. If you travel around North America in particular and look at urban cities or city regions, you see decaying infrastructure with huge social consequences. That's very, very serious. The problem with this is that it takes sometimes tens of years to address, and I'm not sure our city region is on it. Transportation's kind of the first one that we're bringing to the fore, but you could talk about water, you could talk about sewage. It's all old, it's all insufficient in terms of where we want to be. So I think that's a future issue that this city region really needs to contend with. That's going to have to involve the federal government in particular, but also the province and the municipal governments.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, hi. I have to say to Dwight and Cameron, as a single mom, that one of the reasons we strive so much to own our own houses is because, having bunked with 2 boys over the years,
The other side, okay.
you wake up a lot of nights feeling like you've been in a fighting match and you're just desperate for a good night's sleep. But I want to pick up on something Gabrielle said. You know, you said, you know, am I being an idealist when I talk about a more collaborative form of government? Remember one of the times when I really felt kind of like something suddenly arranged itself in a way that made sense when I was talking to Don Lenehan, who worked on a national sports policy, bringing organizations across the country to do more with sports, to bring out the social potential of what sports across the country could achieve beyond competition for the big competitions like Olympics. And I remember he said that the role of government increasingly in the future is going to be as a facilitator, because the problems we're now dealing with are too complex for government to have the answer. And so what we need are the kinds of solutions that, that diversity really gets you. Where you need all the different perspectives to come up with a solution. And to me, I think that's what's so exciting on the 10th anniversary of Civic Action. You know, this is a smaller group than we've sometimes seen over the past 10 years. It almost feels to me as though Civic Action is resetting itself, as you said, for the next 10 years. And I think it's so exciting that we have an organization like this in this city that can help do this convening and maybe find a new way for our political leaders to become conveners, rather than trying to debate the right answer, to pull together the solutions after everybody's had a chance to weigh in and help build it. Because I remember David Pico saying once that one of the great successes that Civic Action had early on was around the social. Julia, help me. It was around increasing the payments for. Yes, and he said that happened. That survived a change of government at the federal level because the solution, everybody had bought into those solutions. The next government could easily implement it. So I think there's something really. I think we're starting to really get at the crux of both leadership and diversity, when we start understanding that that's the role government can pursue. I'm sorry, I don't have a question. Usually I have a question. Dwight.
That, of course, is my co-worker, Mary Weens. You can hear her on Metro Morning telling the great stories of the diversity and other stories in our city. But, I mean, is that the future of government, to be a facilitator? Because, I mean, from what we see going on at our own city hall currently, there's not a lot of felicitation going on. Try to be nice and choose my words carefully here. You know, is that the future? And can we achieve that? Collective leadership, which is important, working together, and government being a catalyst for change, being a facilitator of change.
So again, I think we can. I'm not sure it will be a complete switch to facilitation. You need leadership, and you need vision, and you need personal drive, but they need to be more facilitative and more collaborative for sure. No question about it. And it may take a bit of a generational change. And to the point that's been made here, you know, maybe tomorrow's political leaders will come from this room and others and represent a different perspective and style. I hope so.
You want to?
I was going to say, actually, I think that probably we do have many political leaders in this room, future political leaders in this room. I agree that we need to start thinking about it now and start building that, you know, pipeline of leaders who can think about the different sectors differently. In terms of government being a facilitator, I think that it comes with a long-term view. It comes with a generational change, potentially. I'd hope it would happen tomorrow. I also think that it'll happen through organizations like Civic Action doing the facilitating right now, and then hopefully through that enlightened leadership having somebody say, maybe this is a good idea.
Enlightened leadership, I like that.
I'll just add
sorry, Cameron.
one quick thing. Yeah, I think there's some massive issues that we probably haven't seen the city have to grapple with yet. Climate change is one that we haven't yet discussed. I think that's one. You know, we just saw Hurricane Sandy hit New York City. We've escaped, I think, the brunt of that so far, but you know, we've had mild winters. But I think in the future, we're certainly going to get hit by some new climate catastrophes. I don't know that the city has done much to prepare for that or to plan it out yet.
And as the city gets ready this year, they're actually not talking about snow removal. They're talking about water main breaks because, as you said, our infrastructure is rotting on the ground. Go ahead.
Yeah, some of the issues that have been mentioned, transportation, especially infrastructure, are issues that, as you on the panel have said, require sustained effort over decades. There's a contradiction between that sustained effort and political cycles, which are extremely short, and the tendency of people to want to start over from zero. And given that general condition, plus the fact that in the best of circumstances, we're going to have somewhat of a vacuum at City Hall for the next while things get sorted out, is there a reason to think that civic action should actually step up its game and move into more explicit advocacy on key issues and keep the politicians' feet to the fire on all levels, beyond just raising the issues and raising a gamut of possible solutions, actually move one more step on situations where the answers are perhaps obvious and people are just not willing to take that next step? Is there a need for civil society, which civic action is all about, to actually play a more proactive role on some of these key issues?
Even in such a diverse organization, can you garner consensus on some of these issues?
I think it's a really good idea, and maybe you don't need to garner consensus, but you need to provide space for debate. We've talked a lot about leaders today, but I think a city needs not just informed leaders, but they need informed citizens as well. And something that Civic Action could probably do is to make these debates that we're having more public, engage a wider range of people. You know, some of us have TV shows or radio shows or film festivals, and, you know, these are all venues that we can use.
So just a couple of comments. I think it's an excellent question. It's one that our board, under John's leadership, is discussing. Look at the name, Civic Action. It's not an accident that those words were chosen. We wanted a brand that stood for activism in some sense. I think the trick is that as Civic Action potentially gets more muscular in its advocacy and perhaps more systematic in terms of touching the various parts of the political system, that we never be perceived as being partisan. And that's actually tricky. So within the context of that, I think there is a potential course that Civic Action could take that is more robust, more direct, and more engaged directly with the political system. So excellent question.
So is it more about just informing the electorate then? Is that the role for the next 10 years?
I actually agree with, you know, politicians listen to their constituents, and I hope they do, and they're voting, the people who get out there and vote. And I think the more educated that segment is about these really pressing issues, the more, you know, if you write into your politicians, if you write into City Hall, then hopefully those things will be at the forefront of the agenda. It's not always the case. I think that, yes, education is an issue. Collaboration is also, you know, an issue. In terms of the cycle, I think that's a great question. It's something that I've, you know, been able to travel and see how different governments work abroad, and that question's been raised in my head a few times of, you know, do we just serve the next do we just have that short-term view of the next, you know, 2 years, the next 4 years, what have you, these political cycles? And I think that's a difficult question. In terms of the advocacy, I would leave that to the board to decide. They're much more experienced in this area than I'll ever be. But I think that the way Civic Action, you know, their model right now is about educating and maybe not advocacy, but definitely, you know, pushing the issues and pushing them to the forefront. And I think that's part of the solution as well.
And leaving it to the board is a very politically astute answer. Any other questions? I think I saw somebody. That's it? We're out of time? Oh, we were having so much fun up here. All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
Dwight, may I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I just echo my colleague Jasmine's comments. Thank you for being here. The fact that you're here says a lot about you. Don't turn 70 and regret that you didn't have impact. You can do a lot more than you think. You have more time than you know. You can achieve more than you believe. So just please, please help us with all these issues and get engaged. And congratulations for doing it. Thank you.
All right. Can you both give us some final remarks? Just some final remarks. You guys are good?
Well, it's hard to follow that. I agree. No, you know what? Thank you, I think, for allowing me to be here. This is actually the second panel that I've been on the last month where they've sort of decided to profile a young leader, I guess. I don't really like calling myself that, but somebody who's an unusual suspect, as John says. So thank you so much for allowing me to share some of my perspectives with you. There are, 100 diversity fellows in the room. Every single one of them, I think, should have been up here as well. We all have these perspectives. We all have the impact. Now let's go back into our organizations, create those spaces for others to do the same. Thanks.
Look, this has just been a great way to start the morning. I feel inspired. I'm going to try to go into my rest of the day and make whatever change I can. I hope the rest of you will as well. There's so many people coming into the city every day, every year, who've got lots of great ideas and experience that they can really use to help us grow as a city, and that inspires me, and I try to meet as many of those as I can, and I hope that through this kind of conversation we can keep finding new solutions.
All right, thank you all for your time and your insights this morning. Much appreciated.